If you've been following business lately, you've probably noticed a pattern developing. Companies are investing heavily in AI while still trying to prove the returns. Some are restructuring workforces around new technologies. At the same time, shifting tariffs and supply chain risks are forcing leaders to rethink long standing operating assumptions. But beneath those headlines, it's a quieter challenge inside of organizations. As complexity rises, leadership stops being about reacting to events and starts becoming about creating clarity, trust, decision, discipline across a company. Why is this all happening and what is the impact? Pleasure to be joined today by Nancy Rothbard, who is Deputy Dean and Professor of Management at the Wharton School and co academic director of Wharton's new owner, president, and CEO program. Nancy, always fun to talk to you. How are you?
I'm great, Dan. It's terrific to see you.
This is obviously a very unique time that we're talking about right now. And for leaders, it seems like they always are dealing with some level of change. So, from what you're seeing right now, what's different about leading in this day and time?
Dan, I think that, as you say, leaders have always needed to deal with change. But what's different now is that the pace of change has really accelerated dramatically. Leaders today need a clear framework and practical tools to navigate ongoing uncertainty and disruption effectively. In fact, one of a leader's most important responsibilities is helping employees process change in a way that keeps them grounded and focused. Without that kind of a guidance, this rapid change can create anxiety and distraction, which pulls people into the chaos rather than keeping the organization on track. So, how a leader interprets, responds to, and channels change is absolutely critical to organization success. In periods of constant disruption like this, it can be really hard to step back, to reconnect to a clear sense of purpose, and to find a consistent direction going forward. Leaders are often caught in the relentless pressure of the present, and creating space to pause, to reflect, to plan for the future, that becomes more essential than ever.
So, in a fast changing environment, why do organizations sometimes slow down instead of speed up?
It's a great question. In founder centric organizations, what happens a lot of times is that people look to the top for reassurance and direction. And while that can be a strength early on, continued direct involvement by the founder in the organization as it grows can unintentionally slow decision making and execution. And this can be the case in non founder centric organizations as well. The kinds of guidance that people look for from the top becomes even more important when that change seems to be creating chaos all around. And what happens a lot of times is that leaders can inadvertently become bottlenecks when they struggle to delegate or let go. And when we're going through change, a lot of times it seems like the decision making is more important than ever. And so it becomes even harder to let go. And it creates this vicious cycle where decisions begin to revert back to them, even when that's not the intent. And so it's critical for leaders to recognize where that's happening and build leadership teams that are empowered to act confidently without constantly needing guidance or approval from the top leader. And so when leaders get too involved in the details or too in the weeds, they can ironically undermine their own effectiveness. And what's hard about that is that in the short term, the leader's direct involvement can be really helpful. It can feel really efficient. It can feel like you're doing the right thing. But over time, it hinders the organization's ability to grow and slows the overall momentum. And I have to say, I've seen this firsthand, both in the organizations that I've worked with throughout the years, but also I grew up in a family business and I saw this firsthand in my family business. We hired professional management to really help to spread the load and to delegate authority and to really grow as an organization. And what I ironically saw was that employees were constantly bypassing that professional management team and going directly to the family. And unfortunately, my family kept responding
Yeah.
to them rather than redirecting them back to professional management. And, we talked about that a lot and how that was efficient in the short term, but maybe not so effective in the long term. And that kind of behavior sometimes really trading off the short term for the long term feels like it's the right thing to do in the moment. And especially when you feel a lot of pressure around change, but it can prevent building the long-term leadership capacity of the organization. And it's an instinct that we have to really fight against because it seems wrong to us in the moment, but it's right for the long term.
So, what then are some of the habits that leaders need to have to keep strategy steady, especially in days like these when the headlines are certainly not steady?
Well, one of the habits, as I just talked about, is making sure you delegate, right? And not just trying to make all the decisions yourself. The second is, I think, really thinking strategically and carefully about the emotional tone that you're setting for your organization, especially in uncertain times. The example a leader sets, what a leader is modeling through their words, their demeanor, their reactions really matter tremendously. I do a lot of work and research and consulting and work with leaders on emotional intelligence and emotional contagion. And what the research finds is emotions spread rapidly in groups. So if you are feeling panicked as a leader, you will communicate that inadvertently, even if you're not saying it. They're going to be reading it in how you are reacting to things. And so your emotion regulation, your ability to really stay calm and focused in the face of uncertainty is a tremendous leadership skill. And it becomes even more important in times of volatility and change. The leaders who can manage their own emotions and their own reactions to things end up creating a very stable environment for others, even in the midst. It's sort of the eye in the storm, if you will. When they can remain calm and steady and that also allows both them and other people in the organization to focus on the long-term strategy. It helps the organization to stay aligned to the goals. It helps people to stay productive, and in contrast, when leaders appear reactive or overwhelmed by the headlines, by the winds of change, those kinds of emotions, that panic ripples outward, amplifying the anxiety and distracting from strategic priorities. And that can really critically undermine the progress of the organization because employees tend to mirror what they see, the cues they see from leadership, the signals that the leaders send intentionally or unintentionally. And frankly, I think it's the unintentional signals that end up having a big impact because most of us are conscious of the intentional things that we're sending and we're careful to regulate those. It's the unconscious things that really have the biggest impact because we're not paying as much attention to them. And we have to practice that ability to regulate those unintentional emotional signals and cues. And so the focus needs to move from making every decision to designing and structuring an environment and a culture where strong leaders and decisions will consistently emerge and get made. And so at scale, what happens is decision making becomes a team activity, a team sport, if you will. Uh, Judgment is no longer centered in the one individual, but becomes distributed across a leadership team. And what research shows is that teams often produce higher quality decisions because teams rigorously evaluate the alternatives and thoughtfully debate trade offs. And when that happens, you end up spotting the problems more effectively. And so teams often make better decisions than individuals alone. The other piece that I'd say is as companies grow and as that delegation happens and as the teams become the locus of decision making, productive disagreement becomes essential to that process. Healthy debate, conflict about the way that the task gets done or what elements shape the decision helps to sharpen thinking, reduces the blind spots. But it's only when that productive disagreement is structured effectively, when it is debate rather than dislike. And so there's a really important distinction in the literature on task conflict versus relationship conflict. Task conflict is disagreement about ideas, about strategies, or the data that can improve decision making quality. Relationship conflict, by contrast, is about personal friction or ego driven disputes. And that kind of conflict or disagreement undermines trust and performance. So there's a critical distinction that you have to make as a leader. And you need to keep task conflict from devolving into relationship conflict. You don't want that to happen.
Well, so you mentioned working with founders and CEOs, including in Wharton's owner president CEO program. These are people that are trying to build companies that don't depend on them every day. So, how do leaders balance staying involved with the development of the next generation of leadership?
Absolutely. In the OPC program, we focus on how leaders intentionally shape and influence the decision making environment and how they can think about creating strong succession plans. One of the things that leaders really need to focus on is succession planning, both in terms of sourcing talent. In my current role as deputy dean of the Wharton School, I think about this a lot. I think about myself in some ways as an internal executive search firm. I'm constantly looking for talent. I'm constantly on the lookout for great people, identifying that talent, finding them early, putting them into the right positions, nurturing that talent, putting them into the right positions and roles that can stretch their capabilities, that can allow them to learn and grow. And sometimes that path is linear, and other times it requires helping somebody see the opportunities in parts of the organization that they might not have considered, and giving them an opportunity or a role somewhere that they hadn't, it's not a linear straight shot. But the goal is to align their strengths and passions with what the organization needs as it grows. And so, this internal executive search firm, for any leader, what you need to be doing is spotting talent, nurturing that talent, and growing it. And importantly, what you need to do is to be thinking about that for yourself as well. And that can be one of the hardest aspects of this because there's an identity threat. A lot of leaders, a lot of founders, they have their identity is very tied up with the amazing things that they have done to grow and build their organizations. And that becomes really hard to let go. It becomes uncomfortable especially when you're deeply tied into the business. But without creating that space, the next generation of talent, whether it be within a family or whether it be within, the next layer of leadership in a corporate environment, that next generation needs to be able to spread their wings and grow. And it requires strategic attention. It requires vigilance from the leader. It's absolutely critical for building a strong organization where you create a lasting legacy. And you want to do it in a way that's orderly, not in a way that is urgent. So ultimately, the leaders who successfully scale are able to shift from being that indispensable operator to being thoughtful architects of the talent and culture. They become the people who are able to develop and guide others to strengthen the organization's resilience and ensure its success extends beyond their day-to-day oversight.
Nancy, great to talk with you again. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks so much.
Nancy Rothbard, Deputy Dean, Professor of Management, and co academic director of the new Wharton Owner President CEO program. And for those who are interested in taking part in the program, you can find out more at whartonopc.com.